In the spring of 1917, the French army reached a breaking point. After nearly 3 years of war and millions of casualties, soldiers began refusing to take part in further attacks. This event, known as the French Army Mutiny of 1917, became one of the most serious internal crises faced by any major power in the First World War. It was not a coordinated rebellion. It was not an attempt to overthrow the government. It was a widespread refusal by frontline units to continue offensive operations that they believed were pointless and needlessly destructive. The mutiny emerged gradually, spread quickly, and forced the French High Command to rethink its entire approach to leadership, strategy, and morale. France had entered the war in 1914 with a large conscript army built around an offensive doctrine. The early battles inflicted severe casualties, yet the army held the line. At the Battle of the Marne, it managed to stabilise the Western Front. It endured Verdun. It fought through the attrition of the Somme. By early 1917, however, the strain was beginning to show. Soldiers had faced years of bombardment, mud, trench disease, and constant tension. Leave was unpredictable. Rotations were inconsistent. Conditions behind the line were often little better than those in the trenches. Despite all this, the army remained functional. Morale was strained, but had not collapsed. What changed was the failure of one operation that promised everything and delivered almost nothing, the Nivelle Offensive. General Robert Nivelle was credited with restoring French fortunes at Verdun. He became commander-in-chief in late 1916. He proposed a new offensive for April 1917. Nivelle claimed that careful coordination between artillery and infantry would break the German line in 48 hours. He assured political leaders that the plan would end the stalemate and perhaps end the war entirely. His confidence was persuasive, even though several senior officers warned that the plan was unrealistic, the terrain was unsuitable, and German defences were stronger than believed. When the offensive began on the 16th of April, the problems appeared immediately. German intelligence had detected the French preparations. The defenders waited in deep caves and reinforced bunkers. Heavy rain turned the ground to mud, slowing the advance and disrupting the timetable. French troops moved across exposed slopes and came under concentrated machine gun fire from positions that had survived the bombardment. Communications broke down. Units became disorganized. Momentum collapsed. After 10 days of fighting, the French army had taken well over 100,000 casualties for almost no gain. The losses were severe, but the real damage came from the sense of betrayal. Soldiers had been promised a swift victory. Instead, they saw another costly failure. Many concluded that the senior leadership had misled them or simply did not understand the reality at the front. Signs of collapse appeared within days. Small groups of soldiers refused to leave their trenches for further attacks. Others returned from rest and refused to march back to the front. These early acts were isolated at first, but they set the pattern for what followed. By May and June, refusals to attack had spread across large parts of the army. Depending on how it is measured, around half of all French divisions were affected at some stage. The soldiers made their position clear. They would hold their defensive lines. They would perform normal trench duties. They would repel German attacks, but they would not take part in what they now called attacks for nothing. These were collective refusals, not revolutionary actions. There were marches, protests, and demands for explanations. There was little violence against officers. There were no attempts to desert to the enemy. The mutinies also remained largely hidden from the Germans, who never managed to exploit the situation. The causes of the mutiny came from months and years of pressure. Soldiers had endured a long period of attrition with little sign of any decisive progress. Trust in high command collapsed after the failure of the Nivelle Offensive. Many units had been denied proper rest or leave for extended periods. Conditions behind the lines were often harsh. Casualties continued to rise without clear strategic benefit. Poor communication allowed rumours to spread quickly. Soldiers felt that their sacrifice had no purpose. They were not refusing to defend France. They were refusing to die in operations that appeared tactically flawed and strategically pointless. The French government recognised the seriousness of the crisis. Nivelle was removed. General Philippe Pétain, respected by the troops for his leadership at Verdun, took command in May 1917. Pétain understood that the crisis could not be solved by punishment alone. Discipline had to be restored, but so did trust and credibility. Courts-martial were held across the army. About 3,400 cases were heard. Around 500 death sentences were issued, but only about 50 were carried out. Most of the others were commuted to imprisonment or hard labour. Pétain avoided mass executions. He focused only on those seen as ringleaders, or those whose actions directly threatened discipline. At the same time, he introduced substantial reforms. Food supplies improved, rest arrangements were reorganised, regular home leave was guaranteed. Conditions behind the lines were upgraded. Medical care, sanitation and logistical support were strengthened. Most importantly, Pétain made it clear that the army would not launch major offensives until conditions were favourable. He visited the front often, speaking directly to soldiers and showing that their concerns had been heard. His aim was to rebuild confidence and demonstrate that the army would no longer be thrown into reckless attacks. By late summer, the mutinies had subsided. Soldiers returned to their duties. The French army adopted a more cautious posture for the rest of the year, focusing on defence, firepower and limited, well-prepared operations. These changes helped stabilise the force. When Germany launched its major offensives in 1918, French units fought effectively and held their ground. The mutiny had not broken the army. Instead, it had forced essential changes that strengthened it for the challenges ahead. The French Army Mutiny of 1917 remains a clear example of the limits of endurance in modern warfare. It was not a political revolt. It was a collective refusal by exhausted soldiers who believed that further offensives under existing conditions were unreasonable. The crisis showed that a mass army could not survive on discipline alone. It needed trust in leadership, confidence in strategy, and a belief that sacrifice served a practical purpose. By confronting the crisis directly and addressing both discipline and morale, Pétain ensured that the army survived one of its darkest moments. The mutiny reshaped the relationship between commanders and soldiers and demonstrated that even in a war of national survival, the cooperation of the men in the trenches remained essential.